Hi, everyone. I'm Katey Rich, and this is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. I am coming to you right now live from the Montclair Film Festival in Montclair, New Jersey, where I have been so lucky to spend the weekend seeing the premiere of films like Conclave alongside the director Edward Berger and participating in a panel with some of my Film World colleagues to talk about the state of award season. So you're going to hear that conversation. I was joined live on stage here at Montclair with Chris Rosen of Gold Derby and Chris Murphy of Vanity Fair, both of whom you have heard as guests on this podcast, to talk about how award season works. And then I was joined on stage by Tom Bernard, the co-president and co-founder of Sony Pictures Classics. Tom knows his way around award season as well as absolutely anybody, so I was so excited to get to ask him all of my burning questions about how things work from his side of things and what they've got on deck for this year. So you'll hear all of that. And then in the back half of the episode, I sat in person in this studio I'm in right now to talk to Stephen and Evie Colbert. They are both very deeply involved in the Montclair Film Festival. Evie is the president of the board of Montclair Film. It's a nonprofit organization. This festival goes on for 10 days, but they have film programming in Montclair all year round. And they both get involved in the festival. Stephen's hosting a conversation on stage with fellow New Jersey legend Jon Bon Jovi. And I'm always just interested in how people decide how to build their community and how to kind of use the influence and the power that they have. And Stephen and Evie have both invested so much, not just in Montclair as a community, but in bringing the arts here and what they can do to show children in the area that a career in the arts is something that they can do. They spoke so eloquently about it. They're also just lovely to speak to. So you can hear all of that. But first, let's hear what came up on stage when I talked to Tom Bernard, Chris Rosen, and Chris Murphy about how award season works. Hey guys, thanks for being here.
Hi.
Hi, Katey.
Should you start with your New Jersey bona fide so that you endear yourselves to the Montclair crowd?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm from Essex County, South Orange, New Jersey, not too far from
There you go.
Yeah. So I grew up and my parents still live there. So yeah, it's nice being home.
And I live in the neighboring town, Maplewood, New
There you
Jersey,
go.
which you guys might know.
So the title of this panel is like who wins and why it matters, which is such a big question. Like all of us like to talk about award season for our professional lives. Just when we're catching up for drinks, Chris, you and I just like yell at each other over text sometimes about hot takes. So for us to start from the very beginning of why award season matters is kind of a big thing, but I thought maybe we could start with where we are here in Montclair. There's a lot of films that are playing here in Montclair over the next 10 days. I saw Conclave, the opening night film on Friday night, that are really big Oscar hopefuls. And I think if you have not covered this world for a long time like we have, you're like, I'm in this small town in New Jersey. Why is like Edward Berger, the director of Conclave, here? And like, I think once you get into the ecosystem, it makes sense. So like, what would be either of you, maybe I'll start with you, Chris Murphy, like to explain why this works, why all of these films are going all over the country, all these kinds of festivals like Montclair to show their Oscar hopefuls 4 months before the actual Oscars.
Yeah, I mean, film festivals, it's such a part of the award season machine, and it is really a machine. It's more than just who does the best at the box office or who has the biggest star. There are all these different narratives and different people with different competing stories that they're trying to get their story out. And film festivals are a really great way to do that and to connect with like a smaller audience, right? As these films play like across the country, at Regals and AMCs and whatnot, if they're lucky to do so, not every awards season film gets a really big berth or really gets to play at a lot of these big theaters. It's a really great place for the filmmakers and the actors and the writers to connect with an audience and tell their story and why their narrative matters in a way that I feel like can get really lost without the film festival industry.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. That's a great thing. So yes, and I would say also it helps like you were saying, Chris, there too. Like a lot of these movies maybe aren't going to play like 3,000 theaters around the country. So I think having the film festivals, being able to elevate them to the audience and get the buzz out there, where it's like everybody's constantly writing about these movies and like talking about these movies and generating interest and buzz now, and that really matters. I also think when you go to these film festivals, the hope is that the audience, even if they're not voters, is like representative of the audience that is voting for the Oscars a lot of times. So like, I've gone to the Telluride Film Festival, and it's this where you're like, oh, this is like, these people just feel like Oscar voters. Even if they're not, they just seem like what you would imagine certainly a certain type of Oscar voter is. So if it's playing well to this audience, then maybe later in a couple of months we're rolling it out, or we'll get ideas on how we can market it and strategize to get Oscar voters to like it as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think the fun thing about Buzz, it really is maybe the one thing that really is trickled down, your tweets and your TikToks and your Instagram posts and whatnot. And that's something that you can't really manufacture, and you can't really buy it. You can't just, spend $100 million and generate buzz. So it is a really organic way to promote a film and to launch an Oscar campaign.
Yeah, I mean, we see that some version of that buying it happen in Oscars. Like, there's always like the bigger movies that come out around Thanksgiving and Christmas, where it's like all of a sudden. I mean, Gladiator 2 being, I think, we haven't seen this yet. I hope it's really good. We're going to see it pretty soon. But it's like a huge movie. It has attention. It has built-in Oscar buzz by dint of existing at all, and it has a budget to go with it. But if you're something like Anora or Conclave, even, which is a focus release, or like Flow, another film that's here, an animated film that's from Latvia, it's fantastic. It can like actually earn that. So it's like all Oscar campaigns are expensive. Everyone has to put money into it, but the value, like the actual monetary value of that buzz you're talking about, is immense. And this is the only way you can build it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, so Chris Rosen, you were talking about Telluride, about a place where, it's a pretty small space where these things come out from. You saw Conclave at Telluride, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, starting with that as an example of a film that played here. I talked to Edward Berger before the screening last night kind of about, I know, me and my fancy director friend. But you saw that in a room. I saw it in Toronto a couple of days after that. We witnessed the exact same thing happen, which is that Isabella Rossellini and her very small supporting part gets a mid-movie applause break. Mm-hmm. And that has happened. I think it happened here. I think it has happened in other places. Yeah, thank you. Like, it's just an irresistible human thing. Like, do you think that a festival is uniquely geared toward getting that kind of enthusiasm? Not just that you like this movie, but you're going to break into applause in the middle of it.
Yes. I think there's always, like, you feel like the festival high, right? Where it's like, oh, you're going to watch something, and if you watch it at a festival, you're like, this is the greatest thing ever. And then if a regular person watches it later, maybe they're like, that was good. So you're going to get that built in anyway. That said, like, I do think you can gauge, like at Conclave at Telluride, that was the world premiere, right? Brag for me. I got this first public screening of it.
We are going to get a chance to brag.
Edward Berger was like, just finished it. Yeah. We're going to roll it out. And people were really vibing with the movie. And then, like, Isabella Rossellini, who has this, I don't know if people have seen it here, but you will see it soon. It comes out, I think, at the end of October. She has this great moment, and she's not in the movie very much. Yeah. It's a very small role.
She has maybe like 10 lines, actually, of dialogue.
It's like a Judi Dench and Shakespeare in Love type size performance.
Yeah.
But when she has her big moment, literally spontaneous applause from a whole room, just totally in. And I was like, oh, she's definitely going to get nominated. And then you said you saw it at Toronto, and I was like, did she get an applause break? And you were like, yes. I was like, okay, she's in. So it's like that kind of vibe, that really does matter. And I think, and then you already see, like, I think you could see, like, just again, not to focus solely on Conclave.
Sure.
But she's already then manifesting that buzz by doing interviews. I saw she was interviewed by Vanity Fair recently, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, she's part of this race.
That ability to manifest something this time of year is what gets so exciting. And I feel like I've been talking about this with Challengers, which doesn't really apply to the Fall Festival thing. That's an earlier in the year movie, but I just want it to be a nominee, so I just keep saying it could be a nominee. But I think, like, Marianne Jean-Baptiste and Hard Truths might be a good example of this. That movie, I saw the world premiere of that at Toronto. She got a standing ovation when she took the stage for the Q&A afterward. And, like, I think no one really knew what, Mike Leigh is a filmmaker with established pedigree. We knew that. She's been Oscar nominated for one of his movies before, but I think everyone was so blown away by it. But it's a small movie from a small distributor. Chris Murphy, I know that you have seen that one. I feel like you probably experienced the same thing where you're like, okay, what's this really going to be? And then, oh my God.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned seeing it at a festival. When I saw Hard Truths, I was basically alone with two publicists in an office, just watching it on a small screen. And I was like, wow, this is a phenomenal performance. This is such a difficult, tricky movie. Marianne Jean-Baptiste is fantastic, but how is this going to play? Like, I don't know how this will play with other people. I know my own reaction.
Oh, because you saw it before the festival.
I saw it before the festivals. Before it ever premiered at any festival. Before it landed at a festival. I know it. Mike Leigh said that he tried to ship it around to multiple festivals and was rejected. And watching it alone in a random office in Times Square, I knew what I felt, and that I thought this was a really fantastic performance and a fantastic film, but you don't really get confirmation as to how it might play or what its chances really are going to be until it plays at a big festival and you hear, oh, wow, she got a standing ovation at the Q&A.
Yeah.
And it's actually really, people are laughing the whole, first half of the movie where I was alone and I was like, I think this is funny, but I am afraid to laugh alone. So I think that's another thing that the festivals do really well is that it provides some sort of light consensus, right?
The enthusiasm to me is like what I always look at as like the biggest thing, because like you were saying, it's a very small group, and really think about it. I think it's like 10,000, whatever it is. And then it's also branch voting. We could get really granular here, but it's like actors vote for actors, directors vote for directors, editors vote for editors.
In the nominations.
In the nominations. Then everybody votes for the winners. So for the director's branch, for instance, that's maybe like 150 people. So you really only have to get 150 people or whatever it is to vote you, and they rank the choice. It's ranked choice. So if, like Mary and Jean Baptiste, using that, not to mix metaphors, but that is a number one vote getter, it seems, because like people who love that performance absolutely love it. And then now the challenge is, will the enthusiasm behind that for the people who love it get her enough number ones, or she gets into a best actress race that is very crowded, and it's a small movie with a small distributor, and it needs that kind of like enthusiasm to push through.
Even if more people have seen Anora, there might be more like hardcore enthusiasm for
Correct.
that.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think we haven't, I don't know if we can go here, but I think there's also like the negative part of buzz where we're sort of seeing, I'm thinking of Joker Folie à Deux, right?
Yeah.
Where nobody saw it before it premiered at a big festival, a festival that was supposed to be a very like home court advantage. The first Joker won, it was Venice Film Festival, right?
It won the top prize of
It won the top prize 5 years ago, and then so there's a lot of anticipation for this big sequel with Lady Gaga and Joaquin Phoenix and whatnot, and no one had seen it before. And then it does okay. I mean, the buzz out of there from the critics and whatnot was not very good, but if you just looked at the reaction, it's like it got like a 12-minute standing ovation. But if
should we talk about standing ovations?
We should talk about standing ovations because that's something that is a little bit misleading. Where it's like you hear that if you're not like in the the granular like the itty bitty group that cares about this stuff, you're like, oh wow, that probably did well. But if you know anything about standing ovations at some of these festivals, that's actually quite short.
Yeah, have either of you ever been to one of the festivals that does those long standing ovations?
No,
neither have I.
I would love to know the social psychology behind these things. I just like something about Venice and Cannes. They just keep going. They know. I don't get it.
So imagine at the end of this, all of you people in the room just stood up and gave us a 12-minute standing ovation, and think about how long that would feel to just stand there and clap.
Oh yeah,
it seems really long.
And we know Joaquin Phoenix loves attention and being on the spotlight in that way.
Feel free to do that if you want.
I'm fascinated by that too. But you always try. I agree. Like you could tell, like out of Venice, it was like. The buzz on that one, I feel like we're not going to trash any of these movies, but obviously because it did so poorly.
I think we know that's not a real Oscar contender at this point.
But we didn't know before it happened, right?
Exactly.
There was a lot of high expectations. I will say for myself specifically, I had a lot of high expectations for that film. Lady Gaga, Joker, Joaquin Phoenix, a movie musical. These are all things that I like. And then to see it not coalesce or to hear the muted buzz out of the film festival and be like, oh, this might not live up to expectations. And then seeing it myself months later, you can judge in both positive ways and negative ways about how a film might do at the Oscars due to the festival.
So to talk kind of broadly about where we are in this year's awards race, like this time last year, we'd had Barbie and Oppenheimer. Like I think we all have a pretty strong sense, like maybe something could beat Oppenheimer, but not likely. There are some Oscar years that are like that. This year is really unlike that. Not just in that there's not like a huge studio movie that is of that scale. Like Gladiator 2 could have the potential to be that. Wicked could, but maybe not. But there's just, I don't know what's going to win Best Picture. And I think it's a lot of small movies that are in the mix for that. It feels like a really indie-heavy year, which again brings back the importance of festivals like this. Like this is where they can, build that momentum. Is that how it feels to you guys too? That like the indies are really, unless Gladiator 2 comes in and just sweeps through everything, it's going to be an indie moment this year.
Well, I think so. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's a sort of more fun that way. I always like it. It's a little bit more fun to prognosticate when you don't know, okay, well, this is going to sweep and this is going to win everything. I always think about my favorite ceremonies were not, when Lord of the Rings won every single award, right? It's where you don't know exactly what's going to happen. And I do think, as part of it is, I think it's because we're in sort of a post-strike world, right? Where we had the Hollywood strikes last year and that, things shifted. Challengers is a great example. That was supposed to come out a year ahead of when it came out, and it ended up coming out this spring. And then, boom, word of mouth and buzz has sort of, maybe we'll see that in the conversation in a way that we wouldn't have seen that if not for the strike. So I think a combination of being in this weird sort of like liminal space of what does Hollywood look like after these strikes, and what do people want to see, and are people going, and people are going to the movies, are they going to the movies, has really allowed for a lot of smaller films, really deserving films that might have been completely overlooked in past years to come to the fore.
What about you?
Yeah, no, it definitely feels like this is a fun year because it's incredibly wide open, right? Like you said, there's no real front runner right now. At least on Gold Derby's website, the #1 movie right now for Best Picture is Anora. Mm-hmm. Now that's in terms of like what most people expect to get nominated because it won the Palme d'Or and whatever. That would be like a pretty shocking winner, I think, if it ends up going all the way. But I guess you could draw the lines between that and Parasite if you wanted to.
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of these
movies. Do you want to explain the Parasite comparison there? Just like break that down a little bit more.
So Parasite was at Cannes, won the Palme d'Or also, I believe, and then was a Neon Films release, and kind of like came out of relative nowhere in a year when there were a lot of bigger movies, and just that, like, speaking to the enthusiasm that we were talking about, it just was a movie everyone loved, kind of played through the roof.
Also, I would say that it wasn't like a foregone conclusion that would win Best Picture. I think everybody was like, oh, well, this will win Best International Feature, and we'll see. And because, as we know, the Academy has a really hard time awarding Best Picture to non-English language films.
It was the first one ever.
It was the first one ever. So that was such an exciting year. That was probably one of my favorite, I think, Best Picture wins of all time, just because there was so much genuine love for the film, but there was always this thing of like, oh, like it will never make it all the way. It's never going to go all the way. And then it ultimately did.
To me, it kicked off this chain of Best Picture winners I think we've had. Nomadland being a weird exception because of the COVID year, but movies where someone's like, you know what I loved? And I love that movie, and I love seeing those people going to all the awards together. Coda does it. Everything Everywhere All at Once does it. Oppenheimer is like a little bit different, but kind of a similar thing. Like the cast kind of could travel as a pack, and I think that level of passion for something has become more and more important as the Academy has changed. And so with Anora this year, a Neon release, won the Palme d'Or, that's kind of the basics there, but that's another movie where like the passion is really there for that. And it makes me, I can't decide how heavily to weigh that in considering his chances.
So the one thing I would say this year too that's fun is there's a lot of movies that seemingly have that same blueprint. I think Anora definitely. But then there's also Emilia Perez, which I've seen firsthand, and I'm sure if you saw it at Toronto, I believe, or you had seen it previously.
I had seen it before, but I was that
just the response in the room to that cast when they bring them out, when Netflix does it. I saw it at New York Film Festival too. And again, like through the roof. People are like so excited to be with this cast after the movie, and it's a really great ride.
And that's not just because that, Selena Gomez and Zoe Saldana are in Emilia Perez. They're very famous. But Carla Sofia Gascon, who is the star of the movie, who is basically unknown in America, she's the one people want to see. And she's incredibly magnetic. She's so good at talking to people. And so that's where you're like, oh, it's not just like a star power thing. It's something else.
Yeah. So I'm like, all of these movies I feel like have this blueprint this year. There's a lot of versions of this where you could be like, well, like Emilia Perez is kind of maybe like Coda, or it's like Parasite too, and so is Anora, and so is, or it's like Everything Everywhere again. So that's another reason why this year is really fun.
But I would like Anora and Emilia Perez both are like really bold movies in their own different ways.
Divisive, I would say. Emilia Perez is already, I'm seeing some people, I haven't seen it yet, which is, I don't get invited to film festivals very often.
Netflix, if you're listening, send Chris Murphy to a screening.
Please invite me to a film festival or a screening. But I know a lot of people that I like love and respect who've seen it, who are obsessed with the movie and love it, and a lot of people whose opinion I respect and think highly of who hated it too. So it's interesting. We'll see how that polarization, and if it ends up being, as it plays out of wider audiences, as polarized as the critics and sort of these, pundits seem to feel about it. But yeah, it's a little divisive, I would say.
So Anora, Emilia Perez, we feel like have like the passion pick, and talking about Best Picture in general, that strength behind them. I can't, like The Brutalist is another major contender. I don't believe it's playing here at Montclair, but it's playing in a couple of places. It's coming out for May 24. There's passion behind that, but I can't decide where it falls on the Power of the Dog Coda scale. And I wonder how you guys are reading that one. Because to me, that one feels like a major Best Picture contender, but it might be a really interesting test of this kind of passion we're talking about.
I feel like it's Oppenheimer. It's not going to be $1 billion movie like Oppenheimer,
that would
obviously.
Be incredible.
The Brutalist, again, if you're in this room here or listening, it's a Brady Corbet movie about a Hungarian architect after World War II who comes to America.
Yeah.
And then it's basically like the rise and fall of the American dream in a single movie. It's a 3.5-hour movie with a 15-minute intermission.
Sure is.
So it's like a real strong sit. Go ahead, Chris.
I was like, I thought that was Megalopolis.
I think it's a great double feature with Megalopolis. No. I think it could play like Oppenheimer. I think there could be like a lot of passion behind it. I think Adrian Brody is like a top Best Actor contender to potentially win.
Fascinating. Well, actually, I guess he wasn't a top contender when he won in 2002.
Surprise.
That's the interesting twist about that.
But he's only been nominated the one time for The Pianist when he won, and now he could win again. It's got Guy Pearce playing like just a great, great American in quotes, and he's a great villain, kind of like Downey Jr. in Oppenheimer. I think there's a lot of connections there, and I think the one thing I would say is you hear a 3.5-hour movie about a Hungarian architect coming to America after World War II. There's maybe a segment of the audience who is like, "Oh my God,
yeah, it's called
what am I in for?"
Brutalist. It's not like a welcoming title.
But like Oppenheimer, which I mean, your mileage may vary if you were not a fan. I felt like that was the quickest 3 hours of my life.
Absolutely,
so fast. And this movie is like the quickest 3.5 hours. Like the editing is so crisp. It feels like two separate movies, and you're not like dragging it all. And I think that's why it'll play like Oppenheimer. And I think people will be, if they get over the hump of seeing a 215-minute movie, will be like, wow, that was great. So I think it will have that kind of feeling as well throughout the season.
And there's an intermission in it, too, right?
Yeah,
built-in
check your
intermission.
phone.
You check your phone, you use the bathroom in the middle of it.
Yeah, the thing that I keep asking myself about this crop of Best Picture nominees, we talked about Best Picture contenders are not nominees yet. Nora Amelia Perez, The Brutalist. Conclave, I think, is more traditional in a lot of ways. Not that it's really good, and I think it's like deserves to be in there. But I keep saying, like, how weird is too weird for the Academy these days? Like, is there anything that is like too out there? And I think Nickel Boys is an interesting test of that. That played at the New York Film Festival. I finally got to see it. It is really gorgeous. It is hard to wrap your head around in a lot of ways. And multiple people have compared it to me to The Zone of Interest in terms of just like stylistic flourishes and doing things with the camera that other people don't think to do. I don't think there is such a thing as too weird for an Oscar nomination or too like out there, but I think that is going to be an interesting test of whether that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think with that movie, Zone of Interest is a good comparison just because I think Zone of Interest was like the difficult, arty movie of last year. And I'm putting those in air quotes for people who are listening. And I'm like, I do think, though, that, like we were talking about, there was the people who love The Zone of Interest absolutely love The Zone of Interest. And
same for Nickel Boys so far,
And Nickel Boys the same thing. And then we could talk about, like, so Nickel Boys premiered at Telluride. It was solid response, I think. It was played at New York Film Festival as well, really strong. And then I think where that movie will be interesting from a strategy standpoint for Amazon, MGM, Orion Pictures, whoever's put that's the group who's putting it out. They moved the release date from late October to December, which I thought was actually really smart because I think that movie is going to get, when critics groups start saying New York Film Critics Circle or Los Angeles Film Critics Association are giving out their best movies, that is a movie that will show up in these awards. Like, it'll probably win New York Film Critics Circle, I think.
Oh, is that your prediction?
That is definitely my prediction.
Hot take. I love it.
Okay.
My hot take is because everyone who I know who's in the New York Film Critics Circle thinks it's the best movie of the year. So I was like, I
You're
think that'll
doing
win.
detailed surveys of this group of 30
Analytic.
people.
But I feel like if it comes out and you're like, oh, when Amazon, MGM, Orion Pictures is able to run an ad that's like New York Film Critics Circle Best Movie of the Year, Los Angeles Film Critics Association, Best Director, or whatever it's going to be, then it's like, oh, this is the important movie of the year, and like whether or not it's a broad mainstream like Gladiator 2 style where that's going to be like, oh, everyone likes Gladiator 2.
Yeah.
Nickel Boys is going to be like, man, the people love this, and it could get in easily. Not easily, but you know what I mean? Like, it's a movie that I think people will rank at number one. The people who love it.
That's so interesting because now that you said that, I'm thinking about the exact opposite version of that, which is kind of Barbie from last year, which is like, the serious arty movie that'll often like go the distance or get at least a look or consideration. But I think we forget because Barbie was such a big success. We think of it as like a huge movie as it was. But there was a lot of conversation of whether it would be taken seriously as like a girly comedy, quote unquote, by the Academy. And while it did really well in nominations, it missed out on some key nominations. I mean, Margot Robbie didn't make the cut.
Greta Gerwig didn't get Best Director.
Didn't make Best Director, and it only won for Billie Eilish. I'm pretty sure it only won Best Song. So as we were talking about, what might be too out there, what also might be too
in there,
or too conventional, or too not taken seriously enough on an artistic merit because it made $1 billion and it's based off of a toy and it's not serious, which I think is interesting to think about.
Yeah, that's always like Top Gun Maverick was an interesting example of that. Like that, and Avatar got in that year, still kind of COVID-y in 2021. Barbie, like this year. Is it Wicked? Like, is that?
I think it's
where we get to Wicked? I think
it might be time to talk about the only movie I've seen this year. I've seen other movies, I promise. But I do think that's the uphill. I think that's the battle that Wicked has, is the same, like, well, it's a musical. It's not serious. It's not really about, and it's about female friendship. It's not about anything,
It's about female friendship. Who cares?
Who cares about that? I can hear people saying that, though, which is like the sad thing when it's honestly like really well made. Really, it's a really fantastic adaptation in many ways. So I hope that it's taken seriously and not just like, oh well, it made however much money it will make, maybe $1 billion, and made this money, then that's the win. Because I feel like a lot of people said that for Barbie.
People are going to say that for Deadpool and Wolverine. I think.
Yeah.
Like I maybe there is an FYC campaign for that, but I feel like everyone's like, just take your money. You're fine.
Saved Marvel. Enjoy.
Yeah.
I think with those movies too, and I wouldn't be surprised if Wicked makes it in. And I guess you could put Gladiator 2 in this conversation too, though I think it has a little more, though again, it's 24 years ago when it won, right? So it's like the Academy's a lot different than the time, like that Academy. But like those movies almost have to make, like with Barbie and Top Gun and Avatar, like Wicked, if Wicked is like going to make $1 billion, then I actually think it couldn't get in. If it made like not $1 billion, I think it would be like, no, we're not going to put it in. Like if it's the crowd pleasing movie, then it has to actually please the crowd.
Yes.
I guess. So I think that's another thing you have to, that's why like we were talking about before, like none of this stuff, like box office doesn't really matter and it's about the movies and stuff. But if you're the audience movie, then you better have an audience. If you don't have that audience, then you're not going to get in, I don't think.
And with Wicked, I would say you are the audience movie if you are selling macaroni and cheese with the characters in it.
Yes. Is that what they're doing? Are they doing that?
Yes. That's out there. There's Lego sets. There's
Is it green macaroni and cheese?
There's green and pink. I don't know about that. But if you're positioning yourself as, we've got a Target line and a this line and a that line, you're positioning yourself as the audience movie, so you better, deliver on that.
I mean, we were talking about box office, and a lot of the movies that are playing here, like, Piano Lesson is going to be closing night next week, and that's a Netflix film. It will have no box office we ever get to see. Conclave, I think, could make some money, but Blitz, an Apple movie, I don't know if that's going to make money. Flow, the animated movie I keep bringing up. And I think there was that year in 2021 or 2022 with like Tar, and there were, or same years, anyway, there's been this streak of like fall awards movies that just like went nowhere at the box office. And there's like kind of this panic about it. And they do fine in Oscars. And I wonder where we're feeling about like how these smaller movies can make money, if it matters if they make money. You get something like Thelma, the Magnolia release, which played incredibly well over the summer. It made $14 million, which doesn't sound like a fortune, but like for that kind of movie really is. Like, how much do we look past box office for these smaller movies in terms of Oscar buzz? And should we look past it?
I think, yes. It's great when you have the headlines. Like Anora is a great example. The platform release for that, where you have the headlines where it's like, this is the best platform release in like a year or whatever,
But it literally
right?
is on like 6 screens right now.
Right. And it's probably not going to make a lot of money, Anora, right? It might make $14 or $15 million at the end, right? If it's very lucky. So, but I think the fact that you have the to me, it's the perception. And I feel like, so that matters. So like for the smaller movies at the box office, like Thelma, I thought like, that's not a lot of money, but I felt like people spoke about it in terms where it was like, oh, that was a nice success.
Yeah.
And like Anora, I think
like
you'll
what
do
they
that
expected
too.
from it.
Right. I think people like to vote. They like to bandwagon a little.
They want to vote for the winners.
They want to vote for the winner in the cool movie. So like you might love Saturday Night, but like in the end of the year, you're like, oh man, that really kind of didn't connect with the audience. I guess I shouldn't vote for it. I don't know. But like, like that kind of thing. And then in terms of the streaming movies, like you mentioned Piano Lesson and Amelia Perez obviously is one too. I think that it depends on the platform, but obviously you cannot say enough about how visible movies are on Netflix. Yeah. So I think like the Piano Lesson, if it was out in theaters, August Wilson adaptation, that's really good. I mean, I think we've all seen it. It's
really
actually
really fantastic.
It's like my favorite of these August Wilson adaptations, including Fences, which was the Best Picture nominee and won an Oscar for Viola Davis. I think this one is like better than that. I really liked it. But I was like, if that was
Washington family violence right here, you're trying to pit Denzel Washington.
No, I love Denzel produced it. Denzel, if you're listening, I love you.
Yeah, we should say
even though you like the Yankees.
Malcolm Washington, who is Denzel Washington's son, directed the Piano Lesson. Denzel Washington directed Fences. Anyway.
And Denzel Washington produced Malcolm's movie,
which also stars John David Washington.
Yes, they're
a very talented family,
and they love August Wilson.
And they do, and they're going to be here at Montclair Film Festival.
They're going to be the closing night film.
Malcolm won a breakthrough director here, right? And John David has got an acting thing.
I agree too. It's the most cinematic.
It's really cool and it's really good. And I was like, man, Malcolm Washington's great. Anyway, the point being, I think if the Piano Lesson, no matter its quality, was released in theaters, it would not be like a big runaway success. Yeah. But I think because it's on Netflix, people are going to really pay more attention to it. So I think
that's the way about Amelia Perez as well.
And I definitely feel that about Amelia Perez. Now, Amelia Perez is a Spanish language French musical. Is that how you would describe it? It's France's international film.
Yes, yeah. There's nothing really, if you watched it and didn't know it was directed by Jacques Audiard, you would not call it French. Like, it doesn't feel French in any way.
No. It feels completely insane in a good way, I would say. And it's like really fun. But both those movies, I think, will benefit greatly from being on Netflix.
Yeah.
And the visibility will really help. So I think that's how kind of like you
And they get to avoid the headlines of like, ooh, only made $2 million.
Yes.
Which I totally agree. I'm thinking about in terms of like whether box office matters for these smaller films. It's hard not to forget about Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? That was a really good example of a movie that came out not as an Oscar contender really at all in, I think, March of that year.
It premiered at South by Southwest like 2 weeks after the Oscars.
2 weeks after the Oscars, and really just genuine love and like word of mouth, and then also really making it broke the $100 million threshold, which a lot of people thought it wouldn't do. It was a really small movie that kept growing and growing and growing. I think that definitely contributed to why people, it ended up sweeping basically that year of the Oscars. And I do think there was maybe a corollary to bring back Challengers. I could see maybe that's an argument in Challengers' favor, right? Where it's like it had a $52 million budget and it made over $100 million. And so in a time, in a time where it's like we're looking to save indie film, we're looking to save people going back to the movies is such an important thing. So I do think, especially for, to use the word buzzy movies that weren't positioned for, Oscar success and, coming out in December or November or whatnot, I do think that could make a big difference.
Can I throw out a theory about what might also do that? What about Nosferatu, guys? It's directed by Robert Eggers, director of The Lighthouse and The Witch. It's coming out on Christmas Day from Focus Features, which also has Conclave, so they have their Oscar horse in the race. But the fact that it's coming out on Christmas Day is hilarious. Like, I just support the weirdness of that. Like, what if that's a big hit? Like, what if?
I'll a little tea for you. At Telluride, I was talking to people and they who are affiliated with Focus, and they were like all in on this being a big audience hit. I think the play for the Oscars for that then is like, and this did not do well, but I look at the movie and I'm like Nightmare Alley, where it's like Best Picture and get some crafts and like kind of like, and if it's a hit, that'll help. Yeah. I think Baby Girl could also be considered like a dark horse.
That's my Christmas movie.
That's also coming out on Christmas with Nicole Kidman. I think what you mentioned, Challengers, I think this year especially is great because last year at this time, I think this weekend was when Flower Moon opened up in theaters this very weekend. So you had seen Flower Moon, Anatomy of a Fall, Zone of Interest, Barbie, Oppenheimer, like holdovers, all the Best Picture nominees had already been like set. And like people were just like, these are the 10 nominees basically. Like maybe within like reason, The Color Purple was like maybe the last one that people were holding on to. Yeah. And I'm like, this year, it feels like there's maybe 6 or 5 pretty safe movies according to like most people. If you were to ask, it would be like Amelia Perez, Anora, Conclave, Dune Part 2, which we didn't mention, but that's like a big hit. Yeah. Sing Sing, which I think is pretty strong, and The Brutalist, right? And then after that, there's like 4 slots where you could have any number of movies. And as these movies come out, where you're like, oh, we're hopeful for Wicked. You saw it, I can't wait. Or Gladiator 2, can't wait. Yeah. Or Nosferatu, or any of these movies.
Juror Number 2?
Oh man, I can't wait for Juror Number 2. That's going to be my fave.
Clint Eastwood. You never, don't underestimate Clint Eastwood.
But I'm like, if some of these movies don't work, right, for whatever reason, like if Gladiator 2 is like, it premiered in LA on Friday, the tweets were euphoric. But also,
of course, that's why they do that. They invite people who are going to have the euphoric tweets.
So then when the euphoric tweets turn into like a 68 on Metacritic, you're like, oh, maybe this, and it doesn't make $1 billion. It's like, oh, maybe Gladiator 2 isn't as strong as we thought. Then I think the Oscar voters will go back to either movies they just loved, like Challengers, which I think we all agree is fantastic.
So fun, so good.
Or go to these other movies that are coming in. And I think this year especially, there's room for something like that to surprise, where it's like, oh, man, you know what? I just love Challengers, and I still love it. So why am I not going to vote for it?
Totally. We should mention A Complete Unknown is another one.
That's another one.
Yeah, that's Searchlight release. It's the Bob Dylan biopic starring Timothée Chalamet. I think the Bob Dylan nerd, Chris, I can't remember how much of a Bob Dylan nerd you are. Like, the Dylan nerds are furious about this movie.
I don't know. Well, I followed the Searchlight Twitter account, and they found a lot of Bob Dylan fans who are very excited for this movie. Katey, I don't know.
In the trailer, Timmy sounds like him if you close your eyes, but also sounds like Timmy. I think he sounds pretty good.
I thought it sounded pretty good, too.
I thought he sounded good, too. And it's shot right here in Bloomfield. I think they were shooting it. Yeah, they shot a lot around here. So, the fix is in for this group. I'm ready. Let's go.
What are you rooting for? Like, we've talked about a lot of titles. We talked about things we're interested in. But do you feel like there's like your personal passion pick? If you had a ballot, if you were an influencer who was throwing a party for the contenders, who would you be writing really hard for?
I want to say something original or like some like out there choice, but I mean, the first name that came to my head was Marianne Jean-Baptiste. Like, I really think the work that she's doing in that film is so complicated and so difficult in an amazing way and layered and nuanced, and it's exactly the type, and she's had such a great career, but has always sort of been, you know, a little bit under the radar, a little, you know, and hasn't had a chance to step into the forefront like this, and I do think I would say Marianne right now.
That's a good one.
I'll go with, I love, Nora's my favorite movie still, but I'm going to not pick Mikey Madison because I feel like she's safe. I would go with Yura Borisov, who plays Igor, who I would say is the, quote, heart and soul of the movie. Absolutely. That's one of my favorite award season just bon mots is Heart and Soul.
Heart and Soul?
That was last year, was Lily Gladstone, was the Heart and Soul of Flower Moon.
Of course.
And I think Yura Borisov is the heart and soul of Nora, and if you get to see it here at the Montclair Film Festival or in theaters, he's incredible. It's like such a great performance, totally defies what your expectations of that character are. He's so fun, and I really think he can make it in like the best supporting actor race. So I would pull for him. That would be my influencer.
Well, it's also been a trend of double nominees in supporting actor. So if you imagine him and Mark Edelstein, the Russian Timothy Chalamet, which is what everyone wants to call him, who's in Anora, like the two of them getting in together, that would be.
And then Karen Karagulian, who plays the third guy in this movie, who is like the best.
It's so funny.
Boomer Gen X kind of like, I can't believe these young people are so stupid. That's basically his whole character. It's just a great movie. You should really
kind
see
of the vibe
movie.
of Anora. I'm going to throw out as I get to make my own pick, and this is something we didn't get into too much, but I saw Blitz a couple days ago, and I just fell so hard for that movie. And I feel like it's not that it needs, I don't know what kind of support it needs. It's an Apple release. They've won Best Picture with Coda. They're the only streamer to have done it. Steve McQueen has won Best Picture with 12 Years a Slave. He's back with this film. It's not as... It is kind of brutal and uncompromising in a lot of ways. It's set during the London Blitz. It's showing a lot of children in peril. This young boy who's been separated from his mom, played by Saoirse Ronan. But I just was so swept away by it, and it has this like bigness to it. Like maybe it winds up being the 1917 to Anora as like the big war epic that like can't get quite the passion behind it. But I feel this big passion for it, so I feel like I'm going to be beating that drum. Now that you guys are on the Challengers train with me, we can share that burden.
We can share,
I can have the Blitz train. Okay, if I'm reading correctly, it sounds like Tom Bernard has made it here. He's parking right now. Unbelievable. So I guess we can set up. Have you guys seen, so the two Sony Classics movies that are here are I'm Still Here and The Room Next Door. Have you guys seen either of those?
I've seen The Room Next Door.
Okay.
Not I'm Still Here, but I'm very excited to see it.
Also, like a fascinating case of like bringing people into the Oscar race who have like both like, Julianne Moore and Tilda Swinton are the stars of that movie. They both have Oscars at this point. The idea of being in the club, I think, is where that movie really comes in. And Pedro Almodovar has had like kind of this like rise up into the ranks of the like as the Academy has gotten more international. So it's when like every single person in the Academy is going to watch that movie. Like it has kind of that automatic consideration, and then it's like a matter of where the passion comes in for that. It's an interesting one to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Well, Sony Classics is like a great track record of mobilizing to get their movie seen and getting nominations where you would not necessarily expect them. I'm thinking Parallel Mothers, right, for Penelope Cruz, and Antonio Banderas, right, for Pain and Glory, Bill Nye for Living. It's like there is a demonstrative history of success here of getting
Timmy, Call It By Your Name,
visibility behind these movies that I think maybe in other distributors' hands would not be there. So anytime Sony Classics has something, I'm like immediately like, oh. So like, you didn't mention this one, but it's out now. The Outrun with Saoirse Ronan. That was like a big...
She could be competing against herself.
Well, she's supporting.
Supporting in one, yeah. It could be a Scarlett Johansson.
But that was one where I was like, it played really well at Sundance, and the reviews were great, and it was like, good movie, Saoirse's fantastic, and I was like watching and being like, who will pick this up? And then when Sony Classics picked up, I was like, immediately putting her in my predictions, because I feel like she has got... the performance and then the backing of the history of Sony Classics will help. So that's like how you kind of also think about this.
Yeah.
In terms of the distributors, I always like look at that too.
If I had a T-shirt, I might just make a Saoirse Ronan like blanket T-shirt for the rest of the season. Oh, well, Tom Bernard, thank you so much for joining us here.
Let's move down, Chris. Hey, you can pop up here.
Okay. Oh yeah, it's like a talk show where the new guest takes the closest seat. Do you need a moment to get your breath or anything?
No, I'm okay. Just spent some time out in the Garden State Parkway. Guy kind of smashed into the back of me, but and I hit the guy in front of him, but it all worked out.
Wow. Well, we've been really promoting New Jersey here, so I guess we can handle a little bit of fender bender.
Not the perk.
Jersey film.
So as you
don't forget, the Almodovar was partially shot in Montclair.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Oh, the Room Next Door was partially.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
See?
Jersey film.
So you heard us talking about The Room Next Door and as well as I'm Still Here that are playing part of this festival. And, we talked about this earlier, but you have such a different perspective on it about what it means to bring your films to a festival like this. Like, what do you learn about your movies? What do your filmmakers learn about their movies when they play in front of an audience like the one in Montclair?
Well, each festival is completely different. I mean, if I want to learn something about my audience, I go and watch it in the Toronto Film Festival. Toronto Film Festival, I guess, from the way the media goes there, just where they are and the influences they have, they are sort of spot on for movies in America. And you go in there, they get every joke, they get every little nuance of the film, and you just watch the room and it breathes with the movie or it doesn't. It's like Wicked Little Letters, which was a movie a lot of people really didn't connect to. That movie played perfectly there.
Wow. And,
showed that it did here. And Montclair's certainly a great place, too, because it's a movie-going audience.
Yeah.
And, they're discerning here. And they sort of, I think, don't listen. There's no critics left in New Jersey, so really there's nobody to influence them.
They're all good.
But anyway, yeah, so it's a very good. But, you go to Telluride. Telluride is full of really rich people that fly in there and own houses and used to be kind of an interesting audience, but now it's
interesting.
It's a much older audience, and it's just like Sundance. I mean, Sundance hit the wall because as you have a film festival in a lot of places, it's remote, it's hard to get to, and all of a sudden it increases the price of the land, and so all of a sudden somebody builds a house there, like Roseanne Barr, and then Oliver Stone builds a house in Telluride, and all of a sudden people are buying up huge plots of lands and building houses bigger than the local hotels in New York, and nobody who works there can live there. And for Sundance, same thing. They came there. They're in the mountains. Nobody was there. Right now, all those mountains, you can't walk through a mountain without running onto somebody's yard. And so, if you're a young filmmaker or a young student who's really into film, or somebody that just doesn't have a house as big as a hotel, you can't stay there.
Yeah.
And so Montclair is certainly a place where everybody has access, which is great. But the festivals change. Let's say Sundance is moving to Boulder, let's say.
I was going to say, do you know? that was still up in the air, I thought.
That's my guess. Boulder is Cincinnati, you pick it, right?
Yeah. I can't figure that one out.
So I think that's going to bring a big difference to the Sundance Festival because it's going to have a much more current audience. There's places for people to stay. I mean, if they can have a football game with 100,000 people, they can handle the crowd and they can come and go. So, you have to just keep your finger on the pulse. I mean, the New York Film Festival used to be the place where, they spoke and it all happened. Not anymore. And so, heads change, places change. Cannes Film Festivals, it's an audience full of French people, so, you're watching a comedy, a U.S. comedy with a bunch of French people, it doesn't work out.
Might not hit, yeah.
So, anyway, it's a wide variety of audiences, but this place is great.
Well, we were saying, as you were getting here, that, you've got The Room Next Door and I'm Still Here. I think that they are both opening in theaters just to qualify in December. They're going to be opening more widely, like in the new year, or they're kind of coming later. There's a really slow process of getting that word out for both of these titles this year.
Well, yeah, the Academy's got the rules change every year, just like the politics change, and so the Academy this year has decided. I think you have to open in 10 theaters in certain towns that are known about. To be able to qualify. So a qualifying run used to be you could just open, in Montclair and nobody knew about it and you'd be qualified. You could make pretend you opened your movie, maybe in February. Now it's a little different. So we've got to sort of put it a little closer to that January 17th. Is that the day they announce?
Yes.
And so like at Almodovar, we'll go at Christmas in several key cities, and that'll create a certain word of mouth for sure.
Yeah.
And then I feel very good about its chances of being nominated for various things.
Yeah.
I think a lot, but I'll just go for various things.
You don't want to put your thumb on the scale just yet.
No, but it's a spectacular movie. So, and then we'll pump it out and keep it out on the screens through the Oscars, because right now for movies, especially specialized film, The only way you're really going to sort of fall back to the old days where before COVID, lots of people went to see it, is to be in the Oscar world. Somehow that Oscar race puts this movie as something that people want to see. The exhibitors that are not as smart as Montclair Cinemas and the movies in Red Bank and others like AMC, which to me, if you get an email from AMC and you're a film goer, do they ever have a movie that you want to see? And, it's like they got everybody's information. And, if you're a specialized film goer, that one doesn't show up. And so, but AMC, they like the Oscars, and so they continually play the Oscar movies. That's a thing for them. And then, you have like the specialized movies, theaters play the shorts. So the Oscar season is really healthy for a specialized product.
Yeah.
And I think it's what's kept it alive during the dark period, which is hopefully coming out of soon.
Yeah, we were talking also about, box office for some of these smaller films. Like a lot of the films that play here are not going to make, even the same kind of money. Not in Deadpool and Wolverine money, or even maybe Everything Everywhere All at Once money. It's a smaller prospect. But it sounds like it's not that not making a lot of money lessens your Oscar chances. It kind of, once you're still in the Oscar conversation, the money kind of follows.
Oscar makes you a lot of money.
Yeah.
And don't forget, as the business has evolved and changed, pay-per-view is much more important. When we had a movie called The Father with Anthony Hopkins, we knew he was going to win. It was,
Why didn't you tell the Oscar producers that? Because I feel like they scheduled those Oscars.
They got caught up. They forgot who their members were.
They forgot what Sony Pictures Classics can do, probably, too.
His performance was, bar none, the best performance.
Right.
Of many years. But so we opened it in small theaters, and instead of going wide when things were really well, we went big on pay-per-view because the theaters weren't playing, and so that was almost like our wide break. And so it made quite a bit of box office, so to speak, on the pay-per-view. So this pay-per-view mix is now sort of somehow part of this. And my big issue with the cinemas and specialized cinemas right now is, let's say you guys like a particular band that plays here in Montclair. Somehow they find you and tell you Leo Kottke's coming here or Yarma's going to come here, and you know it. They have your information. And you don't get an email from the movie theater that says, hey, you're an Almodovar fan. I know on Tuesday I want to alert you that it's going to be playing in the theater down the street from Friday. You don't get that. So unless the movie's got really a lot of staying power, you go, oh, God, I just heard the movie was good, but it's gone. I guess we'll have to catch it, on the ancillary. The theater owners haven't collected their data. They don't keep the customer's information. They don't organize it so that they can send you an email for what you like. And for reasons that are beyond me, I don't understand it. And if they did, it's like in the old days, you got a calendar, you had it on the wall, or if you still go to the film forum, you still have a calendar on the wall, and you know what's playing because it's been booked in advance. Now, people seem to book a movie, for a week or two, and they don't promote it. They may be promoted for a week. We now have to go, and because the specialized theaters have not sort of jumped into connecting with their audience, we've got to promote for 2 months and go in like 800 or 900 theaters in the commercial screens to get people to go. So anyway, there's a crisis going on. The Oscars is one thing that saves it.
Yeah.
And that what's playing because the Oscars are everywhere.
You've got festivals like this where you're reaching out to these, voters who are based in America. You can have these screenings in New York, LA, but we've been talking about how international the Academy is now, how these people are all around the world. And when you have an Almodovar film, obviously he has international name recognition. But how has that changed your work with that Academy changing?
Look, the goal of every Oscar campaign is simply to get the voters to see your movie. You know whether it's got the goods or not, and some are on the border, whatever. But the fact is no one's going to vote for it unless they've seen it and sort of connect to what is Oscar-worthy in it. So the Oscars have now a thing you sign up for that has every movie. So your goal is to get people to watch the movie in the theater if they can, but that's difficult. But every movie is now out there. They just put out the foreign language films. And you can join a committee to vote for the foreign language 15 shortlist. And I will then receive 15 movies that I have to see if I'm on the committee, which I am one of the members. And then once I see those 15 movies, I can then watch other movies that are on the screen to vote for them. But the fact is, I got to watch the movies, and they know if I watched them or not. And I think more and more they're keeping track of how many people watch them. And so you've got the whole strategy now is, when do I launch my movie on the site?
Oh, wow.
You know, do I want to have, wait for the momentum and the awareness so that when it pops up there, everyone wants to see it? And then, the Inside Baseball game, on the Academy site is, when you put it out there for, I think, a week, it's on the top of the chart. Then after that, everything is alphabetical. So if you had a movie with an A in it, you're good
so
for
Nora's going to be great this year. We got it.
Yeah. So... there's all these little nuances that you're all just trying to gear to get people to see the movies.
Yeah.
And it's no more than that. And so so Netflix, streamers. What streamers want is they want you to see the movie on the stream, and the only way you can do that is to pay them $15 a month. So they don't care if they win, they don't care if they lose. They simply want to be in the game and not have it really available in the theaters. So that during the whole Oscar season, you've got to sign up to Netflix or Disney or Paramount or Hulu, because that's where the only place the movie's going to be accessible.
Wait, they don't put them on the platform, on the Academy platform?
They put them on the Academy platform, but that doesn't matter. They don't care if they win or lose. They just want you as a consumer.
I see.
To say, okay, we've got it. We've just spent $10 million to about a movie about a guy and a maid to win Best Picture. It's not going to win. But you certainly want to see it, and all you have to do is give us $15 and be a subscriber.
Yeah.
So that kind of mixes up the way the Oscar world goes, because if you're not doing that, if they spend that money, it's an advertising money. It's advertising to get customers to sign up. The studios and especially companies spend money. That's like you're spending the money for the profit of the film, for you and the partners with it. So it's a completely different game. But, it's like they make the rules now to stop. They used to make them to stop Harvey Weinstein. Now they make the new rules to stop the streamers from doing these extravagant events.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about the days of, I remember growing up, I had friends who, were in SAG, or their parents were in SAG or whatnot, or were Academy voters, and they get these, DVDs of screeners, right? And they'd watch, half of them or some of them, they'd watch a bunch and then wouldn't watch any of the others. I mean, what was the strategy like back then in terms of because you wouldn't know who was watching, they just get sent DVDs?
Well, yeah, you had to spend them. I mean, let's say you were nominated for SAG. There's 120,000 screen actors that you got to make a DVD for to send. So if you want to really be in that game back in the day, you had to spend $300,000 to send DVDs to my grandmother.
Right.
And the SAG Selection Committee is a very strange group, because they have that 120,000 members, but then they have 2,500 members that select the nominees, and it's done randomly.
Wow.
And my favorite story on that was one day I was driving in and I was listening to Howard Stern. And Howard Stern is now a SAG Selection Committee. And Jackie the Joke Man is now a SAG Selection Committee. And I think Stuttering John was. And they just said, whoever calls in, we'll give your vote. And then I had Jackie the Joke Man call me up one year, and my other friend, and they said, thank you for sending me all these DVDs. And I said, I'm not sending you DVDs. And I said, you should check. I think you're on the selection committee for SAG. But so, the people who vote in a lot of the categories that are precursors to the Oscars, that's a weird marketing deal.
A weird marketing deal.
So how important is that for you, in terms of thinking of Oscars? So you have all these Best Actress contenders this year. Do you need the SAG nomination to get them nominated to the Oscars because of the perception?
I got to get them to see it.
Yeah.
But they now have a screen.
Right.
So the members can see it on the screen. As the broadcast film critics now have a screen. But we've noticed the broadcast film critics don't watch much.
Why do they have to watch? They can just read
I gotta get it together.
Because we now can track how many people see them on some of the screens we put out there.
Do you feel like it makes a really big difference if you can get them to a screening where you've got your talent there, they're doing a reception, they're able to talk to the director for 5 minutes versus watching it on these screeners? Do you notice a difference in how the movie sticks with voters?
Well, I can tell you this. The Academy has screenings out in L.A. in the beautiful theaters. It's got, I think, 500 seats, incredible, and nobody goes. And you have the director there doing a Q&A, and if you go there, maybe there's 100 people. So I don't know how much influence that has. Now, if, let's say, you're at the Palm Springs Film Festival, and there's an event, and maybe somebody's being honored, or there's a panel where, there's a discussion amongst actors or something very interesting, that, I think, is influential.
Yeah.
Just to hear the people talking about their craft. But those parties and stuff, back in the day, they were there to get people to see the film. So where they would put a giant spread out. They would, some streaming company sent me an email, actually a Facebook thing, and said, we're going to be showing the movie on this site, and sign up and we'll deliver you dinner at home.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
So it was like a $50 bottle of wine and a DoorDash, dinner from a nice restaurant. So it's, I don't know if that would have influenced me. I think it hurt them, with certain categories.
Yeah.
Right.
So, because again, the Oscars are nominated by category. So I think there's like 350 documentary people. There's like, 100 some odd costume designers. So all of those groups nominate all the categories except Best Picture. Everybody votes for Best Picture. So everyone gets into these sort of minutia interactions with them. Let's say the costume designers, they have a little group where they talk about them, and people do presentations to the other costume designers.
Does it help? So, you have Room Next Door, right? Alberto Iglesias is the composer, and was he nominated for Parallel Mothers previously? So, does it help then to know that he was already nominated? Does that give him a leg up because, that small group already knows and likes his work?
That was a really finagly group, but that gives them a leg up because they know who he is.
Right, so they'll maybe listen, they'll pay attention to his, and the music in the film is great, not just to gas you up. It is really great, and it's a strong contender.
Right, the costume design and the sets, all of the sound, all that stuff is. But again, they're all just small groups.
Yeah.
The actors are the biggest group.
Are they the hardest to predict as a result?
Well, a lot of the older ones are dying, but it's still dominated, I think, by old
Crotchety old people.
older people that were had their day in Hollywood in the in the 60s and 70s, and
worth keeping in mind.
I've had dinner with 100-year-old actors.
They might have some good takes.
At the Directors Guild Awards.
Sure.
I think we are close to running out of time. Do we have time for audience questions at all? Or we have about 5 minutes. So I just want to give anyone a chance, especially Tom, please, because we've been sitting here gabbing forever. So if anyone in the audience has questions they want to throw out there before we wrap things up, please do. Okay. Should we get it? You can just talk. It's a small enough room. Go for it.
I have a question about how you all feel about the growth from 5 to 10 films for Best Picture. Because to me, it's added more of the same old, and I don't know that it's really diversifying the selection and the winners.
Well, look, it's a TV show.
Yeah.
They make a lot of money on the TV show, and I think they needed to have more talent involved. The selection process is still from the Academy, and it's a weird process because it's not, they don't count the most votes. It's like you put 10 down, and they take the votes in order until there's a winner. It's like they count number ones, and then once that's done, if you've got enough of a majority, then you're in. If you don't have enough, then they count number twos and number threes. I know. Well, that's, what can I tell you? I think they should have probably categories like that for actors, and I would see increasing more because there's more members, there's more movies, and I think there's more diversity just in the work itself, as well as the people that do it. I mean, New Jersey, the tax rebate program has a diversity clause where you can get more rebate money if you have a diverse crew. And the crew has to be from New Jersey. One of the little-known facts I've been trying to get them to put out to Variety and all the other places so that they copy that. And it's also, you get more if you go to South Jersey, but I don't know about that.
Yeah. I feel that something that I like about the move from 5 to 10 is that it's not always 10. You don't always know exactly how many.
It is now. It's always 10 now, isn't it? Didn't but for a while it was a sliding scale.
It was a sliding scale.
Yeah.
So it felt that each entry made it in on their own merit. But I do feel that it has let some nominees that probably wouldn't have made the cut, but smaller films in there in a way that I think is kind of exciting.
Yeah.
But then also you get some, a little more schlock, I guess.
Some of Netflix films.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the schlock.
Wow. I feel like everything is expanded now. Like you see it in sports too, like baseball, football. There's just adding it's that, like you were saying, it's a big money maker. So I think that is also probably why, to be able to say, hey, Avatar got in this year, even though, or Top Gun Maverick maybe would not have gotten in previously. Last year I think obviously Barbie and Oppenheimer might have, but anyway,
Yeah, well, it's true. It's opened the door because I've been doing this since, my first job was at New Line in 1977. And, smaller films just didn't crack the Best Picture category. Right. And now they're on equal footing, I think, with the studio product. It's really being judged on the craft. I think the audience is sophisticated enough now. And I always like to feel Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon changed the world of subtitles because when we put it out, it's a subtitled movie, but Ang Lee, he went to school in Indiana, he's from Taiwan. But when we put it out, the news started running that little thing on the bottom. And so you could read the thing on the bottom and look at the news, and the audience figured out how to read subtitles. Because if you talk to people before, everybody had a different way to read them. Some people read them real fast. Some people just couldn't catch them both. It was, like the further you got to the center of the country, they just wanted dub movies because they couldn't even deal with it. But that scroll changed it all. A lot of people don't even remember it was a subtitled movie.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. All right. I think I saw your hand go up. Maybe just the last question, I think, because I think I want to kick us out of here. So go for it.
How important is it in how much the studio believes in the product going into film festivals? I remember last year I was at a very early screening of The Holdovers. I was talking to the marketing people before the screening, and they didn't really seem to appreciate what they had going into the screening. They were kind of looking to this screening to get some feedback about what they had, and I found that kind of strange because it seemed to be pretty obvious what the movie was when I watched it. And I'm just curious, like in all these contenders for this year, for how important is it, how much the studio believes in it and is pushing it?
Well, The Holdovers, that's pretty weird. I guess no one gave them the email because they paid like almost $20 million for the movie. And, obviously to go onto the Oscar track with it. And so maybe they're gauging the quality of the Oscar audience. But, that was an Oscar movie from the day it hit the marketplace. And marketing people have changed dramatically. Right now, to me, the most important person in the marketing department is the social media person. There's studios right now where they don't even advertise in the newspaper, and there's a portion of it's on TV, but mostly social media now, and the strategy behind using social media is some people get it, some people don't. I think the Megalopolis people didn't get it. It's they were when they put that trailer out, where it said this movie is Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather sucked, Apocalypse Now sucked, and but this movie's going to be good. But they got the information from AI and didn't check to see if it was the same people that said that. So the critics got all mixed up. So that trailer was only out for 15 minutes. But they were in charge. These are the bosses.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Tom Renard, Chris Rosen, and Chris Murphy for being here on stage with me. Thank you all, the audience. If you're listening on the podcast, stay tuned for my conversation with Stephen and Evie Colbert. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Let's talk about Montclair, because y'all moved here, I think you said 20-ish years ago. So
24 years ago.
Okay, so were your children born by then? Was it kind of the classic, like we had kids, we got to get out of the city? Okay.
2 of them were born and one came not long after.
Okay. So when you were, there's the way you think of moving out of the city where it's like, oh, well, we'll live in Jersey, but we're going to commute and our lives are going to be there. Did you think that was what was going to happen when you got to Montclair, that you were going to come here, but your life was going to stay in the city? Or did you intentionally say, no, this is like home. We're going to make this into something?
We intentionally sought out a place that, as Gertrude Stein said, had a there. Mm-hmm. I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. So for me, I really wanted a place that had a sense of community, and Montclair Art Museum was here. Montclair State University is here. There was a nonprofit theater at the time. Luna Stage was right downtown. So Montclair always appealed to us as a place that had a great community. Mm-hmm. And I think we had no idea how great, but it definitely is a town that has a lot of history, and people don't just leave at 8 o'clock and come home at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
When the person we bought our house from, Mr. Langsdorff, I remember one of the things he said is that this is a great community. Get involved. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things he said, is that don't just treat this as a bedroom community. He goes, you'll have such a better life here if you get involved in this community. And there's so many ways to. And I never forgot that.
Yeah. Well, and when this idea came about of Montclair Film Festival, so at the time it was just a festival, now we're Montclair Film. But Bob Feinberg, who is the founder of the festival, approached me and said, what if we started a film festival in Montclair? Mm-hmm. And the first thing I said to him is, well, there's one in the Hamptons, and there's Sundance, and there's New York. Why do you need another film festival? But it turns out, obviously, filmmakers love film festivals, and there's never too many for them. But there's also, I think, for a community, a shot in the arm, both economically and artistically and just energetically. And Stephen and I both had experienced the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, which had impacts on our lives. So it was another reason that we thought the community of Montclair, for me, it was a great opportunity to roll up my sleeves and get involved in a place where I was raising my children.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a community that would appreciate the cultural aspects of film beyond the entertainment aspects of it. I think we think of, going to have popcorn and see a movie. And that's all great. And there's nothing like a popcorn film. But to have an opportunity to have 140 films, from the popcorn film to the most arcane art house film, shows you the breadth of film culture, educates young people who maybe don't know much about that, open their eyes to this as something you can do with your lives, not just something you can go to entertain yourself in a day. To have those artists here, to hear them talk about their process. And I think that's one of the greatest things that the Montclair Film Festival does for Montclair, is that, there's a community that will appreciate it here, but it shows a new, younger generation that this is a life you can have.
Yeah. Like last night before Conclave, the opening night film, I talked to Edward Berger, the director, and it was before the movie had played here, but we were talking about the audiences. Like, he's been all around the world with it, and, the audiences react in a certain way, and, like, you get that feedback as a filmmaker when you come to places like this where it's that smaller, engaged crowd. How do you pitch filmmakers who might bring their movies here on the Montclair audience? What do they get from these guys?
I always like to use the word sort of discerning, right? It's an educated, discerning audience. I think there are a lot of people in the media industry.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people in journalism, but there are also just people who want to see the obscure documentary. It's that kind of – sometimes we say it's like the Upper West Side moves to Jersey, or Brooklyn moves to not Jersey but to Montclair.
Yeah.
I mean, even back in 2000 when we were looking for a place to live, and I think you had just started at The Daily Show – Madeline Smithberg, I think, who was executive producer, said, well, you're going to move to Montclair, right? Everybody moves to Montclair.
There's just like a train.
There's just like a train, yeah.
We had another baby coming.
Yeah. Well, and then when you started the Colbert Report, without realizing it, I think there were, 8 people from Montclair.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, set director, writer, producer. And then we're all like, oh, by the way, I live around the corner from you. Didn't really even know it. But, yeah, I mean, I think that has happened in broader ways than I ever anticipated getting involved with Montclair Film. There's so many people here who want to get involved because they, like me, want to create a better place for where they're living and their families.
Yeah. Well, you're doing when you're running a film festival, like looking at the program, the sponsorships are incredible. You're doing some version of what independent filmmakers are doing, saying, okay, you have money and you want to invest it in this version of the arts. Like there's this pitching process, which is fascinating. And I think anyone in Hollywood is familiar with. Like, how have you figured that out to make this festival
work? Still working. I mean, it's always hard, right? And I think so arts fundraising, which is what I've been involved with my whole life, is really tricky because it's you're not saying you're going to put food on the table or you're going to help the homeless, which are obviously really, really important things to help and support. Arts fundraising is more about touching the heart and telling stories and making connections, which are all really wonderful things to do. But I think sometimes when you talk to a sponsor in the arts, they're a little bit interested in, well, what am I going to get out of it? How many tickets will I get? How big will my logo be? So there's a little bit of negotiating, which
huge, by the way. Your logo will be huge, and however many tickets you need is fine with us.
Yes, I call Stephen the closer. Can you see why?
Because he just offers them everything. And
well,
then you have
he
to
comes
figure
in
out.
smooth as silk like that. He's like, you really want to be involved, don't you?
Well, and Stephen, you've got the role to play too, where you're doing a talk with John Bon Jovi next weekend. You've done these major ones, and you talk to people for a living. But is it different in this context? Is there something you get to do here?
Completely different. I enjoy the work that I do on television, but there's a commercial break coming up, and I learn things about not just them, but about the creative process from them that I don't get a chance to do when I'm doing it in my, the longest interview I might do if I do the entire show for just that one guest. And maybe I'll do 20 minutes with that person. But to do 5 times that much is such a gift to me because everybody I'm interviewing, I'm a fan of.
Yeah.
And so I come into it just thrilled to have the opportunity to do it. And I can't believe I've been lucky enough to talk to the people I have. I mean, to sit down there and talk to Meryl Streep about her process and what she does. What does she do when she doesn't believe the audience is responding the way she wants? And to find out that there's sort of a commonality between how she has to respond to an audience and the way a comedian has to respond to an audience. That's a peak moment for me over the last 15 years. And then to be able to talk to Bon Jovi,
That's coming up.
That's very excited.
I know.
Well, and he plays on stages, but he doesn't get to do stuff like that. Like it's you're both kind of.
Boy, does he play on stages! I want to ask him when he picks the opportunity in any song to grab the mic on the stand and then lean into the front row to all the screaming girls, because I've never figured out when I'm supposed to lean into the screaming girls in my front row, or why there are no screaming girls in my front row.
Someday,
yeah.
We've been doing these conversations. I just was remembering back when we were starting this festival. We were down, I think, at the beach for vacation, and we were trying to think of a way to raise money because luckily we had several smart board members. I was not one of them who said maybe we should raise money before we start this festival. So we were trying to come up with an idea, and Stephen says, "Why don't you let me do an event for you?" And here we are. I think this could be your 14th or 15th.
This is my 14th time doing it. 13th season's 14th time doing this.
Yeah, but we've been asking there have been a couple of two.
No, it's 16
times.
It's 16 times.
It's a lot.
I wouldn't take any of them back.
Well,
is it hard to prepare for those when you have that much time?
No, I have a good research department, and then I it's not for my show, so I pay a little something extra to a researcher, and they have an opportunity to actually produce a piece, and we get together and get excited about whoever it is and what we want to know, and it's almost from a fan's point of view, what they would want to know about this person, and then I try to temper that fan's point of view from someone who's also in show business to know what not to ask. And
fair, yeah.
I'm always nervous. I mean, they're not hard to do, but they make me nervous because I so want the guests to have a good experience.
Yeah.
Not only because I admire them, but I want it to reflect well on Montclair Film. And so far, so good. Batting 100, 100? No, 1,000. Can't bat 100. Batting 100 is terrible. Sports metaphors, not my forte. Batting 1,000 so far. But right before they get there, right before they show up, because I've done benefits for other people, and, it can be a drag. And I don't ever want it to be a drag.
I see.
For them. And so I'm super nervous right before they show up that I'm not going to make it a good time for them. And I think so far it's all been a pretty good time for them.
We always offer alcohol on stage.
That's true. I always make them a cocktail.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one's
Daniel
ever
Craig really liked it.
He had 2. He had 2 vodka sodas. And you could almost hear Rachel in the audience going, "No, darling, no. Only one, please."
I was going to ask, because I was listening to the interviews you did about your cookbook, and you guys talked a lot about, the traditions you grew up with. And I feel like there is this Southern hospitality thing that is real, where you want to be a good host and you want everyone to have a good time there. And, Stephen, you have a show where you do this, but I think the festival's part of that too. You're bringing, Edward Berger, who lives in Germany, filmmakers from all over, and saying, here, this is the best of what we have to offer. Do you think that is a skill that you guys have or a focus that you have?
I don't know about a skill, but I do think it's a focus.
Yeah.
I remember, I think the very first festival, talking to a filmmaker who said to me, this is amazing. We've never really had like a party just for us, you know, and we have a filmmaker party, and obviously filmmakers come and go. There's not many that are here for 10 days.
Sure.
But we always, since day one, have tried to say, well, this is for audience and for artists, and an opportunity both for artists to get to know other artists and filmmakers to talk to other filmmakers, but audience members to meet other artists. So there's always been a sense of hospitality, I think. That's a really kind of, I've never used that word for it before, but I do think that's what we always wanted to be. We're not a marketplace festival. You don't have people with, bidding wars going on about these movies. It's much more a place for an artist to show their work and find out what other artists think of their work and what audiences think of their work and have those kind of conversations, which is a form of hospitality.
Well, and you guys know as well as anyone that, with the strikes last year, the Hollywood business vibe has been so dark and so cutthroat in so many ways. And film festivals like this, there are other ones too, just have this celebration of we're going to set all of that aside aspect to it. And it feels like there's a relief that you can breathe when you get here and say, we're not doing that. We're going to just talk to audiences and Q&As. And
yeah, I hope so. I mean, it does feel, as you said, I think the industry is in sort of a weird reset, which we don't really quite understand yet, but we're just, Montclair Film, we're just riding along the wave. And with that, continuing with our focus of supporting the work, right?
Yeah.
So it was such a joy to have Conclave last night. What an honor to have that film and have that filmmaker here. And regardless sort of what the studio thinks or the journey of the film, for us to be able to hold it up that way is what we want to try to always do.
Yeah, did y'all get to see it? Did you get to see it?
Oh, I
through the
loved
movie?
it. Yeah,
it
It
is
was
such a good time.
The first thing I did as soon as that film wrapped, actually after I leapt to my feet applauding the director when he came on stage, was to go to my guest grid that I keep on my phone of upcoming people on my show and going, are any of these actors going to be on my show? Because I want to talk to someone publicly about that film. I thought it was so brilliant.
You're welcome, honey.
And so I know, but that happens to me all the time with Montclair Film. I'll see something and I'll talk to my bookers and I'll go, hey, I just saw this film. If they're doing press, because not every film comes to New York to do press, but if they're coming to New York and they're doing press, I have to talk to them. And I was kind of heartbroken because I just had Stanley Tucci on for his memoir about what he had basically a journal of a year of his life. And we touched on Conclave, but I would have just said, hey, your book sounds good. Let's talk about Conclave.
So
I just saw the Montclair Film Festival.
So good in that movie. Yeah.
He's extraordinary. And Ray Fiennes and John Lithgow and Isabella Rossellini.
Right. Did she get an applause break in the screening here? I saw it in Toronto, and people
applause break. Yeah.
for her
in the middle of the movie. Yeah,
I think she's got 2 sentences in the whole movie.
Very little to say in that movie, but
but she says it.
But that she should get at least a nomination for Best Supporting Actress because of how much she does. She is silent as the grave for an hour, and then when she talks, not a word is lost.
Yeah, so my focus is award season. These festivals are obviously a big part of it. How much of that do you guys clock into of who should get a Best Supporting Actress nomination, where the buzz is coming from? Programming the festival is part of that, but just, personally, how much do you guys invest in this?
Well, I think from a festival point of view, so we moved the festival to October, I think I was telling you earlier, because of COVID, actually, ignorantly or optimistically thinking that COVID might be over in October.
You weren't the only ones.
Yeah. It wasn't really over, but we have found this is a much better space for us because of the run-up to award season. So we definitely have the studios, when they want to push a film, they sometimes will say, like Martin Scorsese will talk to Stephen because they're trying to get the film and get the attention for award season. So,
and then that actual conversation becomes part of their.
Last year they used that conversation. I mean, we talked to them and worked it out. And so, yes, sometimes the conversations become part of their for your consideration kind of programming. But I think award season in itself is something we at Montclair Film are sort of trying to get it more involved in. We have a lot of voters in this area. Yeah. It's hard to get that information. They keep it very secretive.
People pay a lot of money to get that
information.
Right,
but we've been working to try to make the Claridge Theater, which we run all the time, not just during the festival. We run that 365 days a year. Try to sort of open that as for your consideration and kind of do award season screenings, that kind of conversation we're having. And what we will also do, because we run the Claridge, we will then re-show movies that are nominated. So we have a whole Oscar-nominated couple of weeks, I think, where we show as many of the films as we can. And a lot of them are films we've shown at the festival. We have a great track record, I think, of films that we offer during our festival then becoming nominated films.
Yeah. I think, we have to wrap up, and I don't want you to have to play favorites because every film in Montclair is special. But other than Conclave, any movies playing here that you have seen and really liked or that you're really excited to see here?
I'm really excited about the piano lesson because I'm a big August Wilson fan. And
me too. I'm interviewing John David Washington and
Malcolm. His brother Malcolm is a director. These Washington boys. I know. Not boys, men, but what a family.
Yeah. Plus pretty good looking too.
And they'll both be here, which is really exciting for us.
And when it premiered in Toronto, Denzel Washington was at the party before Piano Lesson premiered, to support his sons. And it was just, it was such a great thing
I also love the way those boys talk about their mother. As a mom, I'm like, that's really great.
That's how you know you've raised them right when they talk about their mom that way. Well, thank you both for sitting down with me for putting on this festival.
Thank you so much for your help and support.
Oh, yeah. That does it for this special live from Montclair edition of Prestige Junkie. This episode was edited by Brett Fuchs and produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my guests, Tom Bernard, Chris Rosen, Chris Murphy, Stephen Colbert, and Evie Colbert, as well as everyone at Montclair Film. It's been such a lovely weekend. You can subscribe to Prestige Junkie at theankler.com and listen to this podcast on Spotify, where you can also answer this week's poll and see some video from our events in Montclair. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you get your podcasts. We will see you next week.